All right, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee gets back together this week. We'll get their second ranking on Tuesday. Let's try to figure out what that's going to look like. Last week, they were very close to the AP poll, which usually they kind of veer from it a little bit. I'm curious if they're going to veer from it here, because one thing I noticed about the AP poll that came out Sunday, Georgia dropped to 11, which kind of tracks with what you and I had predicted in our bracketology and bubble watch, where we think Georgia might be in a little bit of trouble. They're going to have to win their way back in by beating Tennessee. Where do you think Georgia will land in the committee's ranking?
Yeah, I think that Georgia is probably going to fall to around 9 or 10 or 11.
From 3.
From 3, because losing in the fashion in which they lost, it's like they didn't just lose. Anybody who watched the game saw them get dominated. And the committee is a smart group of people who watch these games. You have to remember, the AP voters aren't watching all the games all the time. And the committee members their job is to have an iPad and all their TVs up and get a feel for the game. And if you have a feel for the Georgia game, they weren't really in it at all in Oxford. And to me, I think that matters every bit as much as losing. So the best thing about being a Georgia fan right now is that you have the best coach in college football. And even though they do have some issues with their roster, they have an opportunity to play their way back into this thing. But for the time being, I still think they're probably going to land at the bottom half of the top 10, because the funny thing about this SEC conference, Andy, is that as they're faltering, their best wins keep getting better, and it's kind of like a wave that goes up and down, up and down. Yeah. They have a win against Texas, so as that continues to exist, I think that quality win is going to bolster their resume enough to keep them pretty high up on the list in comparison to the AP poll.
So here's what I think. I'm looking at the AP poll from this week, and I think as a former AP poll voter, I can tell you why they wound up at 11. Because the voters just said, I've got to move Ole Miss up, but I have to have Georgia behind Ole Miss. So they're just going to put them one spot behind. I wouldn't be shocked if that's what winds up happening here. Maybe not at 10, 11, maybe more 9 and 10 or 8 and 9, where Ole Miss winds up ahead of Georgia one spot. Now, Ole Miss was 16 last week in the CFP poll. So how high do you think Ole Miss rises, I think, is the question. And that's going to tell you where Georgia's going to wind up.
Yeah, and also, too, what do you do with Ole Miss and Alabama? Because Alabama has better results against common opponents, too, than Ole Miss does. They just beat the crap out of an LSU team that beat Ole Miss.
In the same stadium where Ole Miss lost, yeah.
And the thing that the voters do in the AP poll that the College Football Playoff Committee is not supposed to do is take recency into account. You're supposed to start over every week. You're supposed to take the stats and the totality of what the team's resume is and re-rank them. So I might have even made a mistake, because today in my top 10, which doesn't matter, but it's fun to do, I put Ole Miss ahead of Alabama, and that might have been an overreaction now that I think about it, given Alabama's resume versus Ole Miss's resume. I think that Ole Miss is a better football team than Alabama right now, so I'm pretty justified in doing so. But I know that there are guardrails and things that the committee has to be more privy to or more cognizant of than I would have to be. And I don't know that they have a great case to be ahead of Alabama. So I think that Ole Miss is probably going to drop into the 8-7 area. I think that Alabama is probably going to be in the 5-6 area potentially. And then you're going to have some pretty angry people because teams are going to fall back a little bit. And then I think Georgia will be in the 9-10 area.
Where do you think Miami falls to?
I think Miami is going to have a difficult time on Tuesday, because Miami now has a loss and they don't have any great wins. And I'd have to look this up. I don't know this off the top of my head, but what's the distinction between them and a team like SMU? What's the difference between them and a team like Indiana? In my opinion, Miami at this point in the year should probably fall behind those two teams, because SMU has a much better resume than Miami does. And SMU's loss is to a team that is currently undefeated in their conference. And then Indiana's still undefeated. So I'm very curious to see what they do with Penn State and Indiana this week, now that Indiana's strength of schedule probably got a small boost by playing Michigan. But, to me, I still think that it's probably going to be Oregon, Ohio State in the top two. Then I think you're going to probably find Texas in at 3. and then it gets kind of murky from that point on.
So I looked up the Sagarin schedule strength, and so you were right about Miami and SMU being close. So Miami's Sagarin schedule strength is 56 and SMU's is 62. So they're kind of right together. There. Yeah.
And then SMU has 2 wins against teams that were in the top 25 last week. Now that might be different because Pitt's probably going to fall out.
Miami has a win against one of those same teams.
Yeah, they both have the win against Louisville, and now Pitt's going to fall out, which is probably going to hurt SMU. So maybe they're the same. But like now that I'm kind of looking at this poll in the graphic here, Andy, I'm wondering, 1 Oregon, 2 Ohio State. Then I would assume that maybe Texas would be 3. But is it possible that Alabama jumps up to number 4 or 5 in this poll?
It is possible because they were very impressive. They have the win against Georgia. The question is like, that Georgia win against Texas is doing a lot of work because the Alabama win against Georgia was not actually as impressive as the Ole Miss win against Georgia. Like it started out that way when Alabama jumped all over them. But remember, Georgia was winning in the fourth quarter of that game. And it took that throw to Ryan Williams for Alabama to win it. So like I realize you're comparing other things because like you have the Alabama LSU game and the Ole Miss LSU game that you could also compare. I think Alabama will be ahead of Ole Miss, but I think they're going to be fairly close together. Now, here's the question. Where are they relative to Penn State and Indiana? And also, you and I talked a lot about the brand bias going on with Penn State and Indiana last week. Do you think the committee reconsiders that?
I don't know that they're going to flop them now because we got angry. But I think
and Penn State's strength of schedule still is better.
And I think significantly better. Like, and that's the thing too, of just like the reason why I can't stand strength of schedule stuff sometimes too, is like Indiana got a home game against the Michigan team that doesn't have an offensive identity or ability to move the football. It's like, did they actually have a harder schedule now than they did last week because they beat Michigan? Like, I just think that like it just gets overblown a little bit. I think that Indiana has done a good job remaining undefeated in what should be a pretty difficult conference. They got an advantageous draw. And you know what? You know who else had advantageous draws? Mizzou. There have been other teams that have advantageous draws in their conference that have lost games they shouldn't have lost. And I think that not losing, I think the record the record has to matter more than your strength of schedule when you play in a P4 conference, especially in the Big Ten, even if you get that advantageous path. I think that strength of schedule should come into play when you're comparing a G5 team who's playing a bunch of teams that would be ranked in the 80s and 90s in these polls if they went all the way out to 131 than it does between 2 teams in the same conference. So, to me, Penn State's path is not so much harder than Indiana's, even though the numbers say so, to keep them ahead of them. But like, I still think that Penn State's going to be ahead of them, especially because Penn State looked awesome in kicking the crap out of Washington on Saturday.
So Notre Dame blows out Florida State. BYU very much struggles with Utah in a rivalry game, but ends up winning the game. Do you think we see Notre Dame move up a little bit?
Yeah, I could see them switching with BYU. And like, I don't know if the committee does this when they're in the room, but I don't know if they ever feel like they don't have to be as precise with teams that are in a 1-bid league because they just view it as, well, we could put BYU 1 or we could put BYU 11 or we could put BYU 27. Like, if they win the Big 12, they're in, and they're probably going to be the 4 seed. So like, I feel like there was a lot of people who got kind of wound up last week about the BYU ranking. And, the numbers actually do like them. So, and they
need to be ahead of Boise State. They want to be ahead of Boise State or whoever the highest ranked Group of 5 team is. Because if you're not, then there's a chance you could be the 12 seed versus the 4 seed. And that is very different.
Yeah. And another team that's pretty interesting in this whole ranking situation is Colorado. Like, where do they go? Because Colorado, I think, was 20th last week. And now I think that you could see them potentially getting into the top 15 with the win that they have. You have teams in front of them losing, and they are playing really good football. And, for me, you don't hear me talk about recruiting rankings nearly as much as you used to in 2019. But, like, I want to scream that they have really good NFL players on this team.
Yeah.
And if they can figure out their lines and get after it the way that they have,
Well, I mean, they
Their
have
wide
NFL players on their defensive line for sure, and we'll see potential
And they have an
NFL players on
NFL
their
player
offensive
at
line.
left tackle too. He's just a
Yeah.
freshman. So
Yeah.
like they do have guys on that team, guys that would never be at Colorado if it weren't for Dion. And I wonder, and even in my own brain, if you are a person that was critical of Colorado a month ago or 6 weeks ago, or even after the Nebraska game, if that bias or that they're not good thought process is still in your head and you're not paying attention to what they're actually doing on the field with the players that they have. Because if you're watching what they're doing right now, it is impossible not to be impressed by what not only they've done, but what their ceiling can be. Like, I think that BYU should be crapping its pants right now to have to face this team in Dallas. I actually think that BYU would probably rather play any of the other teams that are in the mix in Colorado.
Ari, this video is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you're dealing with something much more serious than college football rankings, it may be time to think about starting therapy. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Visit betterhelp.com/Andy and Ari. That's ANDYANDARI. BetterHelp.com/Andy and Ari to get 10% off your first month. So if you got something going on in your life, sometimes it helps to talk to somebody. Try BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/Andy and Ari. 10% off your first month. All right. Let's delve into the CFP. And remember, they're not trying to project what the bracket's going to look like we do when we do bracketology and bubble watch. That's not what they're trying to do. They're just making the list of teams. Now, ESPN on their show slotted them into the bracket, which I think is a great visual aid to help people understand how this new playoff format's going to work.
But that's not what the
how the
bracket
committee's
look
thinking
like.
about this stuff.
Yeah. I think it's a cool tool. I think it's confusing because even when we post our bracketology and bubble watch, we get a lot of how is this possible? This is what it's like. There's a difference between what the field would look like if the season ended today and what the projections would be. So what we're trying to do here is tell you what it's going to look like on Tuesday, not predict what it's going to look like in December.
Yeah. And I think the committee's like, this is their problem too, because what they do is very much a snapshot of right now. And this is where, look, these rankings aren't really necessary. It's a TV show. People are clearly excited about it. I mean, I look at our site on Sunday and see that the story everybody's hitting is the new AP poll. Like, they just want to see what the new AP poll looks like. So I get it. Everybody gets excited about it. But
which really is amusing to me, Andy, because like people are still obsessed with the AP poll and it has never mattered less.
Well, I think the fact that the committee ranking actually mirrored it last week probably helps it a little bit. And I do wonder when will the committee veer away? Because most years we've seen the committee veer away from the AP and the coaches poll. And it may be this week. It may be this week that there's somebody they like quite a bit better. But I am fascinated. Like, where is Tennessee going to land in this thing? Because we talk about the Tennessee-Georgia game. Like in bracketology and bubble watch, everything's about what is the Tennessee-Georgia game result going to do to this? But they're not thinking about that. They're just thinking about where's Tennessee right now based on what they've done so far.
You know, and earlier in this video, Andy, I suggested that it's possible that Alabama could find its way into the top 5 as recently or as soon as Tuesday. And on second thought, Tennessee is probably a blocker of that. Like, I don't think that they can put them in front of Tennessee at this moment. So, you know, Tennessee being at number 7 right now, you know, if you drop Miami out of this and Georgia out of it, you might see, you know, Texas move up to 3. You know, Penn State could get back into the 4 or 5, but I do think that it's very possible that it's like Tennessee number 5 and then Alabama number 6, because Tennessee has, you know, just won a game against a team that isn't exciting, but they won the game, and teams in front of them dropped out, and they're still holding on to the Alabama win. And that Alabama win looks so much sexier now than it did last week. Like, that's doing as much heavy lifting for Tennessee as Georgia's win over Texas is doing for them. So, you know, they are a really impressive team on paper right now. And frankly speaking, they've got one bad loss, but their resume is pretty pristine. So, you know, Tennessee's playing for a lot right now. I bet you they would have preferred to have Georgia beat Ole Miss on Saturday, because that would have just kept Ole Miss out of the discussion. LSU would have been a little bit further down now with the 3 losses and 2 in the conference standings. and it might have been cleaner for them, but like they need to take care of business on Saturday. And if they do, like Tennessee could find itself in the top 3 the following week.
Yeah, could be in really, really good shape.
Tennessee jumps over Texas if that happens. If Tennessee beats Georgia, Tennessee is number 3 in the following poll, assuming that Ohio State and Oregon continue to win.
So subscribe to the On3 Sports YouTube channel because we are going live on Tuesday night as the rankings are being revealed. You can learn the rankings while we do. We'll analyze them afterward. You know, we're more fun than the ESPN crew. I love those guys, but I think we're more fun. So second screen us, turn the volume down on your TV, turn us up. We'll see you on Tuesday night.